I mean, I'm just going because they got all the artists, and then they have like my kids are little, they do a little carnival ride.
It actually is a nice.
It is a really nice little. It's a neighborhood community. It's like the homeowners association festival.
Yeah.
And they put on every year. We've lived in the neighborhood, 2 different houses, but we lived in the neighborhood for like 17 years now. So like, it's just like a thing. Like I look forward to it every year. And now I'm with the Scouts, like where they're.
I don't know, for some reason, this is not too.
But our Scout troop.
I guess you got
They make up this big A-frame and they do this rope bridge. It's like a big recruiting thing for Scouts.
And your kid has been doing Scouts for how long?
So. So they've been, I mean, I've got a 10th grader and a 7th grader, and they've been doing it since first grade.
Yeah. They're gonna vote for you over there.
My 10th grader is 6 merit badges in project. You're doing it. Like, you're doing it. You know, it's on him, like, your sophomore, good year. Don't wait till junior year. But I'm actually the Scoutmaster of the Girls. Scouts. Yep. So Scouts is done co-ed. And so some of the parents asked me to be Scoutmaster. So we've got like 13 girls. Yes, they're totally separate entity, like their own.
Okay.
As I would say, it's like basketball and volleyball. They're great ball sports. Some people like different ones. There's a whole legal lawsuit.
My daughter, who's
Hello.
their group split. The Girl Scouts, their group split because the scout leader wanted to be on Boy Scouts. And
Oh, this is like
Yeah.
troop of 26 girls.
half the
Yeah.
group went over.
Yeah.
And my daughter is trying to like.
Testing.
Yeah, I think it is on.
So they stayed, and now they have this trip that doesn't go.
Because actually, I know that troop. And they like instantly at 26 kids. I just like my year end off. I got 13. It's okay. We just started in February. I'm happy. I've got 13, and they're from 8 different schools. It's not like I like they all come from different.
That's it. They don't have the rest
We go
of it. Why don't they have?
camping once a month,
Drop it down the rest.
summer camp,
Over there.
doing, it's very outdoor. So yeah, it is kind of.
My boys. My own boys.
See, my kids aren't sports kids. So honestly, especially my younger one, this is always different. Scouts. My older one's on jump too. In high school, that's great.
I guess that's awesome because there's nothing else. So.
I'm not into Boy Scouts. I didn't feel like doing it. I'd much rather go to baseball games than go out camping. I just perfectly happy inside at night. So.
Yeah, thanks.
No, I mean, people like it. It's great.
Yeah, I love it.
When I was a kid, we slept outside. We did all sorts of stuff. But now I'm just not.
At the leadership next board meeting, so I know, like, we have to go. Those names, and what would you want to do if you weren't doing what you're doing? Legislation makes me go.
That's fantastic. Hi, Jake. Oh, yeah, thanks.
Right, and 6.
There you go.
So anyway, so you can make fun of the uniform and do the thing, 9:30 or whatever it is, or 9 o'clock on Saturday. And if you know any girls, well, don't send them to another troop. I got Lake Braddock girls. I have 3 Lake Braddock girls in mine.
So can you get boys?
I have,
Are they separate? They're separate.
They're separate.
Groups.
So, but some Boy Scouts is co-ed, but Girl Scouts is not?
Correct.
right,
Oh, okay.
Boy Scouts is
It's
now
the-
called
the-
Scouts,
Scouts.
which is part of
The Boy
the
Scouts of
game.
America.
But the Girl Scouts are like Boy
They're their
Scouts
own
too.
thing.
So the Boy Scouts call themselves Scouts, and they have boys and girls. The Girl Scouts have
Just
girls.
No boys.
So they use the girls under the Scouts BSC. They can get like Eagle Scout. They can get, so there's all they basically do the same, it's the same program as the boys have had, which is a different program.
Right.
I don't know. They asked me to help lead it. I love camping.
That's awesome.
I don't have girls, so I get them and then I go away.
No, it's great that you like to do that stuff. You get them out there.
I mean,
like to do it.
and I truly like in my marketing or whatever recruiting, I am looking for the girls who want to go camping and hiking. like, cause that's all we're gonna do, like, there's no crafts.
But see, that's good, because the other stuff's crap. All the crap, you know, I meet with a lot of scouts.
I bet you do.
I meet with a lot of groups, and I'm happy to meet with them.
Yeah.
And some of them are
I
good.
mean, I almost invited you to our little court of honor, but I decided, you know what?
I go to those things, I've done the Eagle Scouts things, I've done, but there've been a couple, and maybe it's just recently and I'm jaded, but, you know, I go, and everyone's just messing around, and I'm thinking, look, I'm here because I have to, why? You're obviously not, or you're just why are you here? You know, like, you don't know how to stand up when the flag comes in, I mean, geez, you know, these are older, you know, older Cub Scouts, and they're just messing around. Like, I remember being in Scouts, the first thing you learn, right?
Yeah, you
Down
stand,
in
you
salute,
stand.
right? And that's just some of the good stuff that you learn. So,
Yeah.
you know, so I think there's a mix, but some of that comes in, you gotta have good leaders, and I appreciate anybody who stands up and does it. But sometimes, like my daughter's Girl Scout troop has a head green.
Well, that's what I've heard is that, yeah, it really depends on the
That's right.
Scoutsburg we had. Our ideas, just see that, right?
That's
It's hard to
Here.
Here's some ideas.
So like, perhaps you'd like to read Robert's Rule and run the meeting correctly.
I would be the last person.
There's got to be in a civic association, you learn the hard way to read the rules and learn how to use them.
Oh, yeah. That's a good thing. You want that. I have no idea. Yeah, it's good to see you. It's
good to see you.
I feel like I just see you in social media. You know?
It's better on social media than in person.
Sit that side. Yeah, this is quite
You're on the record now. I'm on the record. I was just writing my book. I should get a copy.
I got a break. I was sharing my doctor. Yeah, they're just trying to figure out so I think they're gonna do it. All right. Getting some stuff out.
I'm not social media, just someone you.
Yes, that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. That's exactly what I said. I said, I need some help.
I didn't ask.
I need to know.
I got a call from a friend of mine who has a friend who had a potential constituent problem. Who was talking to my friend and said, well, you know, I know a guy, you know, from Fairfax, and he probably knows people in Arlington. I was like, no, cut me out of this, right? You know, why you coming to me? I thought about it, like, you go to your friend who comes to me at Fairfax, why you go back to your own person?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't it amazing how that works for us?
But that's that is just so fantastic. Well, no, you tried to make a phone call, but you could call Jackson 84000. I don't, as of 3 minutes ago, but we have that.
There you go.
There's your schedule.
What time did they have to sign up?
Stood up.
Well, it starts at 7.
It was
It's
around
not about 30 minutes.
I was gonna say, you probably would have been better. That's great.
But it's 40 cents. That's great. 1975.
I remember when.
So the other thing that's $3.95.
The exercise is more important. I don't need to do it for a couple of weeks. Just even though I don't do a super workout, it's just enough. And usually on the weekends, it gives me 3 days a week. All right, otherwise. Well, that helps.
Okay. Perfect, okay.
I'll send it out. Everybody will get an email from my office with a spreadsheet kind of thing.
Okay.
I'm done.
There's a desire to kind of get it out in a month. Everybody responds so that we can
I'll take, if I have a slow afternoon, I'll go for
at least a month.
That was a good exercise. I put my
Oh, no,
hand,
that's
I work a lot better. If I sit at the desk all day, by 3, 4 in the afternoon, I'm not. Usually if I'm at meetings, I'm up and about, I'm always in and out. If I have a slow day, for Lose your hand.
Hey, sorry, man. Good to see you. What's up?
A little bit. Yeah. Trying to get summer How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Slow, you know, you get revved up and this stuff. You're just used to it. Hey, many meetings, things.
Let me find out.
Still be some nice weather.
It's like this, what would you be doing if you weren't doing?
There you go. Well, while you're playing second base, I would play center field for the Yankees. So that was
Well, now you're. Yeah, I know. So this is what, I know. Another throwback.
I know, and it's being good.
I think it was a fair question. Yeah.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Sorry, I'm not to catch you.
Good evening, everybody. Can we please rise and pledge allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you and welcome to our September meeting of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. Before we start our commission meeting, we will be conducting a public hearing for the FY20 I-395-95 Commuter Choice Program. The public hearing and our commission meeting are being streamed on YouTube Live and can also be accessed on the NVTC Facebook page. This is one of 2 public hearings that are being held this evening. The other one is in Woodbridge at the Potomac and Rappahannock Transportation Commission offices. The Commuter Choice Program is an innovative, competitive program that invests toll funds into multimodal projects that help move more people through the corridor more effectively. This is our very first round of funding for the 395-95 corridor, and we received 17 applications requesting $31.6 million, which surpasses our $22 million in available funding. We have one speaker that has signed up to speak. When that individual is called, please come to the podium and state your name and address for the record. And you have 3 minutes to speak. Jay is right there. We'll give you a 30-second warning before your 3 minutes is up. And if you have a written statement, you may provide that as well as copies to staff to hand out to commissioners. So I will go ahead and call our first and I believe our only speaker that Lisa signed up to speak to the podium, which is Rob Whitfield. Welcome, Mr. Whitfield.
Chairman Letourneau, members of the NVTC, thank you for the opportunity to make comments. It's somewhat sad that I'm the only person signed up to speak. This is not the first time this situation has occurred. It's indicative of a fundamental failure in the outreach programs of both NVTC, NVTA, and other bodies. There has to be a better way to reach the public. I've been to various meetings this summer, including one on the I-95-395 corridor, which is a comprehensive look of proposed transit, TDM, and other non-vehicular improvements. And so I missed the deadline for commenting on that, but I gather that we see opportunities to speak in future. Nothing I can do or say will prevent whatever you plan to do tonight, but I can only ask that in the months ahead, that there has to be a better process of outreach if we really mean to have significant public participation. One of my biggest gripes, and I back and forth with Marty Noe of NVTA on this, is that under the process that exists there, it's the agencies such as Fairfax County Department of Transportation, rather than the public, that is selecting the priorities. I don't know the situation for the other jurisdictions, but to me, this is a fundamental flaw. What happened with NVTA, and I don't remember for NVTC, is that you have at the end of the process, well, I guess this is basically the end of the process, that when you've selected the projects, then you ask the public to comment. So I don't know how it can be done better, but all I ask is to try and do better next year. Fundamentally, we are going to need, in the decades ahead, an additional bridge across the Potomac River somewhere south of Alexandria. This was looked at in the 1980s and discarded by the then Maryland governor. But I can tell you from riding the Beltway several times in the last month, the outer loop is congested in the afternoon between Springfield and the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, and that will get continually worse. So I wish you success in whatever you're doing today. I'm sorry I didn't have more time to study the specifics of what's proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitfield. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? If not, as I mentioned earlier, the public comment period for I-395-95 ends tomorrow. The commission is not voting tonight on a final package. We are voting to advance a package to the CTB, but that will be a part of our discussion in a future commission meeting. I do want to note, and perhaps it will make Mr. Whitfield feel a little better, we are finding, like many others in government, that physical participation is getting harder and harder. However, we are getting a decent amount of online participation. And in fact, there were more than 100 comments provided to the commission through our online portal as part of the 395 public comment period. So we will continue to work to get those out and of course ask everybody here who has their own social media channels and such as elected officials to do that as well. And I think in both 66 and 395, we have seen some increased participation in that process. But it continues to be a priority for us. So as I said, the commission will take action on the proposed program October 3rd. And so certainly the public's welcome to continue to follow that process. So this concludes our public hearing and we will move into our commission meeting. So welcome back to our September meeting. I hope everybody enjoyed their summer break. In addition to our minutes, we have one action item on our meeting agenda tonight, which is to authorize the NVTC Executive Director to send the full list of projects considered for funding under FY20 I-395-95 Commuter Choice Inaugural Program to the CTB. We will discuss that when we get to the item, but as I mentioned, that is not a final determination of the projects to be funded. That is just submitting the projects for consideration to the CTB. And then we will receive our reports from our WMATA board members and our WMATA committee chair, director of VRPT, and the CEO of VRE. We're also going to be discussing tonight our 2019 annual report of the performance and condition of WMATA, which is developed with input from the NVTC WMATA committee. This is the annual report that the General Assembly has asked us to produce about WMATA. So, tonight is an opportunity for us to get a briefing as to what is planned to be in the report. Again, we've purposely scheduled this to give ourselves some time so that if there is comments or questions from commissioners or some changes that need to be made, we can do that following this meeting and still have time to get this in when it's due in November. We'll hear about the post-WMATA shutdown marketing campaign as well. So moving on to item number 2, which is approval of our minutes. I'll ask for a motion to approve the minutes of the July 11, 2019 NVTC meeting.
Second.
Moved by Senator Black, seconded by Chair Belova. Any discussion on those minutes? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? And anyone abstain? Ms. Crystal, Mr. Meyer, Ms. Bennett Parker, Mr. Vargas, Mr. McKay. Okay. Next, moving on to the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, WMATA. The chair of our WMATA committee was not able to be with us, Ms. Hudgens, this evening. So I will sort of give a brief update in her stead. But the committee has worked, had 2 meetings and has worked in discussion with staff to develop the NVTC annual report to the General Assembly and the governor on WMATA. The document is due to the General Assembly on November 1st. So as I said, we'll be discussing those recommendations this evening. The full report is coming back to the commission next month for approval. The NVTC report is our primary opportunity to articulate our priorities for controlling costs and improving efficiency at WMATA. It also provides a one-stop shop for all Metro Rail and bus performance data, as well as reports on how WMATA is using dedicated funds. And I will note that our staff has a difficult task because a lot of that data comes in mid-October. And so the report is due November 1st, so there has to be a quick turnaround on that. So tonight we'll receive a presentation and you can provide questions and comments on the proposed strategies. Staff will also provide the committee with information on the uses of WMATA capital funding and the performance data to the committee as information is still being collected, as I mentioned. And again, this will come back to us in October. So I will turn it over to Andrew to kind of get us started.
Thank you, Chairman Letourneau. I'm going to go over a slide deck here, which is blue item number 3A. As mentioned, NVTC is responsible.
So it's actually this one, not the one that's physically blue, just to be confusing.
So as mentioned, NVTC is responsible for reporting on the performance and condition of WMATA annually by November 1st. This was included in the 2018 Omnibus Transit Funding Bill where dedicated funding was approved. The report has a number of elements. The first is potential strategies to reduce the growth in costs and improve efficiencies of WMATA operations, uses of funds from the WMATA Capital Fund, that's the Virginia dedicated funding, and then a number of safety, reliability, financial performance, and ridership metrics for rail and bus. And this is due to the Governor and General Assembly on November 1st every year. The report uses a number of data sources. For the strategies chapter, this is actually a policy decision by the commission, so it utilizes Metro board reports, a number of other publicly available reports and information from WMATA. The uses of the funds is information from WMATA. The commission sent a letter requesting that in July. We have received it and are currently working through it, and we'll have that for the WMATA committee in September. And then safety, reliability, financial performance, and ridership is mostly from the National Transit Database. And some of that information is also from performance reports from Metro. The committee has done a great deal of work with staff in setting some direction on this report update. The NVTC WMATA committee held work sessions in April and June on updating the annual report. Staff provided research and peer system benchmarking on a number of topics that were suggested by staff and also requested by committee members, including fare policies for children, low-income fare pass products, parking utilization and other parking policies, as well as complimentary paratransit service in Northern Virginia. And I do want to just thank Zach Smith and Dina Gurma for their hard work as they prepared for those committee meetings. Staff incorporated committee feedback and updated the strategies chapter, which is what I will go over. The framework for the strategies chapter is basically split between new strategies that were developed this year, as well as strategies that were in last year's report. So we've carried over those strategies. We did not lose any from last year, but we've carried over and sort of reorganized them. In general, recommendations here fit into three buckets. First is to drive fare revenue through increasing ridership. The second is to increase non-fare revenues, as this helps offset costs and subsidy growth, and then to control third, the growth in costs. It's important to note here that Metro typically implements changes to service, fare policy, other types of changes through its annual budget cycle. That cycle, jurisdictional staff are closely engaged with the Metro board members, and Metro does need to go through a number of processes. Public hearings, public comment, Title VI equity analysis. It's an annual process. And of course, recommendations that would be included in the Metro budget cycle are subject to fiscal constraints. The first of the 5 new strategies is to maximize the use of A-car trains. So crowded conditions still exist during the peak. We've noted crowded conditions at Roslyn and Pentagon from Metro performance reports. And the idea here is to stabilize ridership and revenue, and it could also simplify yard and maintenance operations. The second is to improve weekend rail service. And what we've seen when we've looked at Metro ridership data is that average weekday service is for rail is generally ridership rather is generally stable or increasing, but we have seen declines on the weekend. And so the on-time performance on the weekend also is lower than during the weekday. And the recommendation here is to improve weekend rail service while maintaining preventive maintenance programs and capital investments, as those are obviously very important. And the motivation is to stabilize or increase ridership and fare revenue. The third is for WMATA to develop parking pass products. So currently WMATA offers an unlimited monthly pass for Metro Rail and Metro Plus. The thought here is that transit riders could prepay for parking for the month at a discount, and this could help curb revenue losses that are outside of WMATA's control. And expanding ways for riders to pay for parking may encourage more transit trips. Again, with the parking theme, the fourth new strategy here is to optimize parking facilities. So WMATA should consider adjustments to parking rates at underutilized WMATA-owned rail parking facilities. And the experience at West Falls Church, which is where the rate was $4.95, it was piloted, dropped to $3 and then made permanent, shows that a lower rate can incentivize additional trips, which had a net positive yield to ridership and revenue. The fifth of the new strategies is to expand and enhance fare products. And so we're recommending that WMATA study fare pass products that address unmet market demand and make purchasing these easier. WMATA has found that pass products increase ridership revenue and loyalty to a transit system. And potential markets that could be explored include tourists and families with children. And we also note that WMATA's forthcoming mobile app offers a new platform and an opportunity to increase the adoption of pass products.
Mr. Chairman.
Why don't we stop here with the new strategies and allow for some discussion and questions? Yes, sir.
So one question on the mobile app, and I went back and looked at the minutes from our last meeting. So I think we had a robust discussion on the app. And I certainly understand it's in this report, but do we have any sense on where WMATA is with the development of their app? I know last month we didn't, or I guess July, we didn't quite know where they were, and we talked conceptually about a more robust discussion, but have we explored or talked to WMATA about where they are in the development of that?
So I'm happy to answer that. In fact, we have been working with WMATA, and we continue to work with WMATA. They're actually working on a big strategic plan right now. We expect to have some detailed information and hopefully a presentation to this body soon. We just want to get things firmed up, but they're working on a big strategic plan that includes mobile ticketing right now. And again, we were sitting around the table with their staff and regional staff as recently as this morning. So I was hoping to come back and say, yep, they're going to present, this is the information. But we have made the ask for them to be coming back and briefing the board later this year if at all possible.
And I have been asking to have that on the agenda, but have been advised that we should wait until they are ready to talk to us. But the urgency is
Brilliant.
real.
And
So,
I mean, obviously, I think everyone around this table agrees, but obviously local governments are gonna start looking to do this if WMATA's not. I know there's obviously conversations taking place, so it would seem that some sort of update from them, that's, has nothing to do with you, Kate, it would be well-timed.
Are there other questions and comments though about the other strategies? Yes.
Any idea why on-time performance is worse on the weekends than the weekdays? Because that's counterintuitive.
Single
And
track.
is that what it is?
That's, there's no, not to interrupt your question, but
No.
it's totally sensible, but during the week, there is no planned single tracking. When it happens is on the weekend, which significantly erodes OTP.
Positive trade.
Yes.
Question on strategy 4, which I think is fantastic. I know I've been talking about this for years and years and years. But the first bullet point says, consider adjustments to parking rates at underutilized WMATA-owned Metro Rail parking facilities. And I guess my question is, does that preclude a look at facilities that local governments are paying debt service on?
Where local governments control the policy at those stations?
Or not, or whether they're reliant on Metro's policies. I think there's a mixture of those. And so I'm wanting to make sure that we're considering these adjustments at all facilities. I know we can't direct local governments to do certain things, but if there are recommendations.
I think the
that come out-
intent was for it to be those facilities where WMATA sets the rates and has policy control. So maybe that can just be.
So that may not necessarily mean the same thing as WMATA owned. Because in some cases, local governments may own them, WMATA may control the policies. And I just want to make sure
Okay.
that we're not precluding this discussion from including those facilities.
All right. Yes.
Same strategy when you said when the parking rates went down and then the revenue went up. Did you sort of graph that or show, I mean, is there like a nice balance and how much did it go up? You know, I mean, I'd be interested because you're bringing up, it's not the only metros. I mean, if we kind of started to get a pattern and understanding, there's an economic term for that graph. Christian, you probably know what it is, where the price goes down and the demand goes up. And then there's a
Oh,
sweet
sure.
spot.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. I'm not an economist, but I remember there was one of those. I'd like more, I mean, I think more information and to Jeff's point, get it out there because local governments, maybe we can't control or WMATA can't, but the local government can look at it and say, hey, maybe if we do this with the revenue government. So,
Point is to grow ridership.
right, and revenue might be good to grow too. Yeah. So it's actually us providing informational support to the region that everybody can use.
So what we do have is what was provided in the board report in December on this issue, but it is not to the scale, I think, of what you're speaking.
I mean, maybe
to.
it's too hard. I don't know how these
Yeah.
calculations, but if we could do more, I think it'd be great.
And I think one important thing to note from the West Falls Church example is that given that the lot had a very large capacity pre-Silver Line, and then with the shifts with the Silver Line, it is a very unique station. So I think it's just important to consider in any analysis.
Well, maybe some other experiments, pilots, just to try.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? So I was kind of the one pushing particularly for the family pass piece because I kind of shared, it's, I've got more than one kid, it's usually cheaper, especially on the weekend, to drive to your destination and park there than it is to take Metro because it really adds up. So I think there's an opportunity there for Metro to, especially for weekend riders if work falls off, to try to work on that. So we'll see, but we're gonna try. Okay, so the next section is strategies that were presented last year and just kind of. Go ahead.
So for strategies 6 through 8, these are essentially consolidated and repackaged headers for the strategies that were included in last year's report. So strategy 6 here is to rebuild ridership and improve efficiency. And what we've done is just picked a few highlights of progress that Metro has made in these areas. And we'll have much more detailed update in the full report. This is simply top line highlights. So there have been improvements to reliability and performance from capital investments on rail. So nearly 88% of rail customers showed up on time. So big increases in on-time performance. Metro did introduce a limited Metro bus to Rail Pass products last year, actually this year, and advertised new Fare Pass products to help drive ridership and revenue. There were increases in non-fare revenues. So last year, the board amended parking policies to optimize parking revenues and capture additional revenue from non-riders. They updated use regulations to authorize the sale of drink outside of station paid areas and streamlined the approval process for commercial uses to generate revenue. And the last year, control cost escalation and enhance the efficiency of the workforce and contracted services. There was an increase in OIG funding. WMATA awarded a contract for operations and maintenance at the Cinderbed bus facility and released an RFP to operate the Silver Line. And we do have a catch-all here for additional strategies, just noting that WMATA has installed and is installing new emergency gates at rail stations to help reduce fare evasion. Closing out here for the uses of the fund, we asked for fiscal year 2019 expenditures by CIP program, and we've simply provided an illustrative of what that will look like. CIP categories are on the left, and CIP programs are on the right, and we'll have that information for the WMATA committee in September. As far as next steps, there's a WMATA committee meeting on September 18. We'll have a full draft of the strategies chapter and the uses of fund chapters, as well as data tables showing the metrics for ridership, performance data, safety, and other pieces of information. We'll also indicate areas which will be updated rapidly when the NTD data comes out in October. And at the October 3rd commission meeting, we'll provide a full report for consideration by the commission, asking for authorization to send the report to the governor and the assembly by the deadline. And we will update that report after the October 3rd commission meeting with the key data that I mentioned that is released right around that time. And then lastly, we will begin this update all over again next year. So plenty of time to include new strategies.
Sure. Yes, sir. I had two questions, one on strategy 7 and the other one on strategy 8. It says streamline approval process for commercial use. Just because of unfamiliarity, can you be a little bit more specific? What does
So
that mean?
this is something that Metro was approved by the Metro board in the past fiscal year. So this is just giving an example of something that had occurred that sort of meets the definition of increasing non-fare revenues. What happened is the board, I believe, delegated authority to the general manager to improve commercial use permits. So if a third-party vendor wants to, I'm gonna make this up, sell food and drink right, like lemonade stand or something outside of a fare gates. Previously, that would have required board approval, and that can be cumbersome. And so in this case, it has been delegated to the GM. So that process can kind of provide a little more certainty for the market, I think was the intent of that.
And the other one, I thought fare evasion was a bigger issue on a couple of bus lines, not so much Metro Rail.
Correct.
So I was a little confused by, I mean, I'm fine with new gates, but by saying to help with fare evasion, I didn't.
So to be very specific here, it's not new fare gates, it's securing the emergency gates. So it
To
Metro,
reduce fare evasion.
Right.
So like.
Right.
So they go both ways, right?
So they don't open when you push them when
To
they're
go
secured.
out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good question.
But if there's an
Lot of me
emergency, they can be open. Yeah. And so I think that capital project is underway and nearing completion, I think. Yeah.
But it's a useful conversation because there is at least a discussion about as new fare gates are brought in, whether or not there's a new design element to it to further reduce fare evasion. That will not be a driver of an added capital cost to be integrated into the procurement of new fare gates.
Mr. Scott first, and then Ms. Parker.
And it's a question that you might not have the answer to, and it may be in the full report. I certainly commend and always like to see us leveraging the private sector whenever we possibly can. So with respect to the Cinderbed bus facility and the RFP on the Silver Line, do we have a sense of what the cost savings through essentially what that public-private partnership, what the cost savings would be versus if it was to be maintained or managed internally?
At least for Cinderbed, Metro did put out a cost savings number, and I don't have that with me right now. We'll definitely include that.
I think that would just be helpful, especially for the General Assembly.
Mr. Marcus?
So just a couple of quick ones. Number one, there was a bullet point on a discussion around low-income fare passes. Was there additional discussion on that?
So there was discussion at the committee on it, at the request of the committee. We looked at what is happening, I think, across the industry in a number of peer examples. We also looked at how many rail and Metrobus riders had transit benefits, because it varies by mode. And I think where the committee landed was that for staff to keep monitoring the issue, but it wasn't something to include in the annual report as a strategy at this time. But it was, I think, a topic of interest that we'll be monitoring closely and reporting back when we have more information.
Any other questions or comments?
I just had a general comment. A lot of these recommendations are clearly directed toward rail. And there are a few that do relate to bus, but I'm wondering if the committee could take a look at some studies that have come out recently, and maybe take a look at whether we ought to incorporate more on the bus side of things. It's just a generic question for further consideration. How do we both expand service and at the same time make it more efficient, and how we deal with integrating with the first mile, last mile issue and those kinds of things. I know there's a lot going on. Metro is looking at a lot of things, so it might be appropriate to see if we could integrate more on the bus side of things.
All right. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you for all the work so far. We look forward to seeing the final report. It is under staff review right now, the jurisdictional staff review as well. So I'm sure they will have some comments. But I think it's a good product, and hopefully those that are receiving it will pay attention to it. Okay, let's check in on other WMATA news. We'll start with our WMATA board members. Mr. Dorsey, you're the only one here tonight.
Okay, all right.
This is your part of the program.
Thank you. All right, so a lot's been going on, and some of this is a couple of month look back since Metro, like many entities around the area, takes the month of August off, at least from formal meetings, but a lot has been happening. And beyond the turnover of 3/8 of the Metro board, which has probably dominated a lot of the news this summer. But substantively, upcoming when we convene next month in September, we'll be taking a close look at where we are with the Silver Line Phase 2 project and seeing, getting a status update on not only the path of construction and finalizing that project, but also the attempts to remediate some of the known issues at this point. Just to refresh everyone, the process at this point is once MWA, the controller of the project, deems it ready and complete, substantially complete, they'll turn it over to WMATA to take a look at. WMATA will then go through its process of seeing whether or not we will formally accept it. And then after that, there will be a period of testing and training before service becomes operational. So in September 12th, we should get a better sense of where we are along that timeline. So anything that you may have heard in the news about date certain, we are nowhere close to that yet. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Over the summer, there's been a lot of work on a capital funding agreement for fiscal year 20, the year that we are currently in. Jurisdictional staff have been working very hard with WMATA staff to negotiate a one-year extension of the CFA, and I think this will be the third one-year extension that we'll be working on. Something like that. We've all lost count. Anyway, multiple one-year extensions to the previous CFA, which covered 6 years, and we do intend and are engaged in negotiations on a 6-year agreement that will commence in FY21. But it's really important to get this FY20 CFA done because it will satisfy the requirements of the District of Columbia to contribute their dedicated funding. And as we all know, Virginia's dedicated funding is incumbent on all the other jurisdictions participating. So this is a central piece in the puzzle, and it's also something that's very important to the state of Maryland, and it's important to us, but for different reasons other than the timing of releasing funds. Let's see, what else we have going on? The big thing this summer has, of course, been the shutdown, the summer-long shutdown from Memorial Day to past Labor Day of the blue and yellow line south of the airport. Happy to report that come Monday, everyone who uses those lines will be able to use them again. Looks like we are past the point where weather could impede that date. So come September 9th, blue and yellow lines will be open south of the airport. Hey, Kenneth and Elizabeth are like, so I do want to note though, because I think it's kind of been lost, and we've talked about this as a platform repair project. It's not just about improving or replacing deteriorating concrete platforms, even though that was the huge safety issue. This work has also done a lot more to not only stabilize those platforms and hopefully make it so that they are not going to prematurely deteriorate in the future. There's also a lot of other enhancements that have been brought to those facilities. Chairman of the WMATA board, Smedberg, and I, along with one of our other Metro colleagues, had a chance to visit several of the stations last week, 2 weeks ago, when they were in the final stages of repair. And some of the things that I think passengers are going to love, the tiles that we all know at Metro. If any of you have ever tried walking on those tiles when it's been slick, you know how treacherous it is. Hopefully you haven't had any slips, trips, or falls, but more than likely, if you do use the system a lot, you have when it gets slick. We now have tiles that are surfaced, so they have a rough textured surface. So that will be a thing of the past. It's really a great improvement that I think people will love. There's also new passenger information displays, which are going to give real-time information, digitally connected, that are going to be very much the envy of many rail properties, because it's just up-to-date technological stuff. There's aesthetic improvements, there's safety improvements, lighting, improved elevators. A lot was done while the rails were shut down, as we would hope. You know, you take advantage of the fact that you're not doing anything during that time, so you go ahead and do a lot of things that urgently need to be done or should be done for future improvements. One of the things that we learned during that whole process is, while that work is substantially complete, one of the last things that Metro needs to do, which does take a while, and they're in the final stages of doing it now, are bringing power back to all of these stations that were shut down for several months. It's not just about flipping a circuit breaker. You have to do that slowly and gently so that you don't overwhelm power stations. That work, just got a report, is proceeding well, no issues. And right now, they're just doing a lot of punch list items between now and Monday. Even after Monday, while all of the work is substantially complete and there are not going to be any safety issues for riders, there will be some ongoing construction work at some of the stations. A few mezzanine tile areas still need to be installed, and then some improvements to bus bays is still going on. But I think everyone's going to really enjoy what they're going to see. It's not just going to be about replacing old stuff. It's going to really feel like, I think, positive step forward. Upcoming actions for, I guess, past actions that the WMATA board dealt with in July before we broke. We renewed, extended an agreement with Fairfax for their student bus program, which is very successful. Hopefully will be a model for other jurisdictions in the region. Well done, Fairfax. I think it's working well for your students. And we also had a conversation about fare evasion, where, as Commissioner Aguirre correctly noted, about 80% of, or about 75% of the fare evasion that we can quantify or that we estimate occurs on the bus side. So $36 million total in estimated revenue loss to WMATA. 26 million of that is on the bus side, and almost all of that is in the district and on district and Maryland bus routes. I think it was about 2% or less on Virginia bus routes, but still, since we are collectively funding the system, we are impacted severely. And, you know, just to put a finer point on it, the fare evasion calculations on the bus side roughly correspond to about 1 in 8 bus riders are not paying bus fares. So this is something that you definitely want to stop, and we're taking a multi-jurisdictional and multidisciplinary approach to trying to figure it out.
And so we're paying for free rides.
Yes. And so other things going on today, as was referenced, the bus transformation project, which is not a WMATA project, but it is WMATA adjacent, has issued its strategy plan, if I'm remembering the nomenclature correctly, which is looking at a few key goals: frequent and convenient bus service, getting greater bus priority on our region's roadways, enhancing the customer experience, including better passenger information, easier payment options, clean and safe buses, and technology forward buses. And then the fourth strategy, I believe, is I guess best described as a regionalized task force to govern bus operations to ensure that the experience is not necessarily the same, but is integrated throughout the jurisdictions. So that strategy document was released today. There is an action plan that is intended to be released by the end of the year. And in a closing bit of good news, you know that Metro for years has been in the process of having a number of open corrective action plans under the FTA oversight guidance. Now that safety oversight is with the Metropolitan Safety Commission, Metro Safety Commission, excuse me. There's been great progress over the last 6 months. 40 corrective action plans have been closed. And now of the 289 original ones, nearly 80% have been closed. So we are nearing the end of what has been a very long process of making sure Metro satisfy those very vital requirements. And that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey, for that very thorough report. Appreciate it. Any questions?
Yeah, and I don't know if some of these might need to be addressed by Mr. Potts. So if the stations are reopening, I thought it was on Sunday. Is it Monday? Monday. So there's not really any room for any delay at all before the rush hour on Monday. When do the trains start running on a trial basis after the electricity is restored?
This weekend.
Okay. And can we get a definite assurance that the trains will be, I can tell my constituents they're running on Monday?
Running on Monday.
Okay. I like the confidence there. And then the last question, and I might have asked this when this first came up, if 1 in 8 bus riders are evading fares, has there ever been consideration to having either undercover police officers on the buses? Does that already occur ever?
It does.
And then so they get tickets or whatever happens at that point when they find someone. Okay. And I would just make one point. I was asked to carry a bill a few years ago, which we passed, saying that you could pay off board like they do in some other systems, and then you get a ticket on board in the rare instance or the random instance when an inspector comes on, you have to show your validated ticket. I'm just assuming that you would come up with higher evasion at that point because you can just take a chance. You're not showing the operator you didn't pay. You're just in your pocket having a ticket that was, or maybe not even having any ticket that was validated or not. So I'm just presuming that Metro is going to be considering that when they move to that kind of a system, which may not be for a few years.
Earlier it was with the Metro Way, so.
Yeah. Well, I did it for Metroway, but Metroway is not using it yet. So I'm assuming that the future holds that it might happen for other BRTs like the one being constructed, planned in South County and Fairfax. Number 1. Just a question or suggestion.
And Senator Evan, just to speak frankly about some of the conversations that we've had about this in the Metro Board, you know, we in Virginia, given our 2% fare evasion, are much more inclined to looking at off-vehicle fare collection as a viable strategy to move people more quickly. It's not necessarily as embraced by other jurisdictions. Not all of it is because of fare evasion, because as we've discussed before, not all of the jurisdictions share the same concern about fare evasion that we do, but that is one of the things that frequently comes up is this gonna create a further incentive for people to avoid fares, and will we have to spend more on monitoring and policing, effectively reducing the value of the fares that we do collect. So that's been one of those big old policy conversations.
Okay, well, I really appreciate your assurance that I can tweet to my constituents.
Wait.
That they'll be,
Do it.
served on my.
Do it.
And wait, and didn't we hear before that wasn't it free to start? Or is there a program? How are we marketing it?
Wait, free what?
Go ahead and tweet that out too. I thought there was some kind of consideration to how we're getting people back on the train.
So that's the next agenda item,
Oh,
is the
okay.
post-Wilmata shutdown marketing
Oh,
campaign.
okay, I'll wait for the next item.
So, yes.
I just have one question on the fare evasion, because you made the comment earlier, Mr. Letourneau, about kids. And I don't know what portion of this we think are kids, juveniles. I mean, to me, I thought public school district students had a bus pass. We're doing this in Fairfax because we want kids to ride the transit and we're letting them ride for free. So I guess I'm wondering how many of those are kids, and would they otherwise already be riding free? Are they not producing a pass? Or is that something we should be looking at to close the gap? Because if it is, we want to encourage that behavior. I mean, these are future transit riders. I just don't know if there's any way even that Metro is looking at that. Obviously, they haven't caught a lot of these fare evaders, but for the ones that they are we seeing a pattern that it's a lot of juvenile activity or adults?
So a lot of the rail activity, which is a much smaller percentage of the overall, is apparently of people who presumably are connected to DCPS, who therefore should be eligible for free bus and rail service. So that's some of the issue is there's no reason for this. Like, this is money that we should be capturing.
Right.
It essentially is providing a subsidy benefit for the District of Columbia,
Correct.
having people that they would otherwise pay for or evading. We don't quite know on bus, because while we are able to have better numbers on bus, because a bus operator can simply press a code, they're trained not to have a confrontation with someone who refuses to pay a fare, but they can note that someone is fare evaded. So we have good numbers on how much that occurs, but we don't have good data on whether they're adults, children, or whatnot. So
I just don't know how much of a information campaign through, the district public schools may not feel incentivized necessarily to do this. I don't know if kids are doing this because it's like a competitive thing, can you do it? But it just doesn't, it seems nonsensical to me that if you had the right to ride that for free and you weren't paying for it otherwise, but the district was, that you wouldn't produce a card and use the system. And I don't know if anyone in Maryland, any of the Maryland school systems do that.
yeah, I don't know.
It's an angle I think we should look at, because the problem, is significant, but we don't want to deter kids from using the system. And if it's a simple thing that can draw the numbers down, they need to be, educating people on that. It doesn't do those kids any good to not produce those cards. They're not paying the fare anyway.
Exactly. And if I can, Mr. Potts, Mr. Chairman, if I can ask Mr.
Yes.
Potts, I do believe Metro has regular programs of having personnel, including the ACPD, going into the public schools to talk about responsible stewardship and ridership of the system. And
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know we do partner with DCPS on that and do various programs to encourage the use of that pass. So that is ongoing.
Okay, I remember who was next, but Ms. Garvey.
I don't think it's next, but it's the same issue.
Okay.
And it's actually for Mr. Dorsey or Mr. Potts. So as I understand it, then if students have a pass from the district's paid for that pass or pays when they ride each time? So there's an incentive in the district not to fix the problem? Is that, I'm not saying that that's why they're doing it, that's what's happening. I'm just checking about incentives.
it's a perverse incentive, as we would call it.
Yeah, just that's what I thought. We seem to be talking around it, but that's it. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, similarly, actually, could you characterize conversations thus far with the district? Is there general stonewalling? Is it sort of willingness to discuss it, but not real willingness to change? This is a not insignificant driver of costs. And I look, for example, at our talented NVTC staff racking their brains to come up with cost-saving measures, and here's one in front of us. So could you share a little more? Is this an opportunity for us to place some greater emphasis? I know the commission, for example, weighed in on fare evasion when DC was considering decriminalizing that policy, or that as a matter of policy, but are there ways that we can help or try to exert greater influence?
I'll defer the second part, because I just don't know what would help at this point, but
Okay.
I'll try to characterize the conversations as best I can. The district, when it comes to transit, as you know, the mayor's office has been wanting to do free DC circulation. So there's very much an ethos in DC of free transit, which I think is great.
Okay.
I
As long
mean,
as they want to pay
right,
for
it's
it.
great, you know.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
want,
as long as we can
whatever,
pay for
as
it.
long as it's paid for somehow, if you wanna make it no cost to the riders, that's terrific. I think you have that general desire, and then a concern that fare evasion disproportionately captures people of color in a criminal justice situation that they find unpalatable. And then you have the whole idea that really, at the end of the day, you're having people riding transit, so what's the problem? I think that's generally where they're coming from. And what we've been unsuccessful in doing is saying all of those things are your own prerogative as a sovereign city. You can make those policy decisions. You just can't have those costs passed on to other jurisdictions. And so that's where we've been unsuccessful in getting them to accept that level of responsibility. So if you have friends in the DC Council, in the mayor's office, feel free to use those connections, but that's really been the stumbling block. They don't ultimately see it as a problem that, you end up with people riding without paying, yet they don't seem to accept that it is in fact other people who are paying.
So I assume the answer is no. There isn't like some way that we have some leverage to make it matter to them. I mean, I get it and why it all is working out, as long as we're willing to keep subsidizing the 1 and 8. In a way, is there a way for us to find a way not to subsidize the 1 and 8?
We do have leverage. We are not without leverage, but I don't think it would be prudent to publicly discuss it.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's perfect. That's just all I need to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? I'll just ask a brief question. So we're ending this platform project, but there's another platform project next year. Has that been fully scoped out yet? Which stations will be included in that
Yes.
project? Is Orange Line only, or is it orange and silver?
So it's East Falls Church, West Falls Church, Dunmooring. It's six stations, I believe.
So
Greg, help me out.
Yeah, we're finalizing the schedule. I mean, what was originally announced was Vienna, Dunmooring, West Falls Church, East Falls Church, and then 4 stations in Maryland.
So wait, so
North as well.
the silver line comes down and it hits East Falls Church, right? So does that mean the silver line will also be shut down? You won't be able to continue through?
So we're gonna be announcing all the details of that, service levels, all shut down in the near future. So that is, I know, the GM discussed
Okay.
a while back, but that is coming soon. So we'll get. All
Well, where I'm going with this is I don't know the schedule on the silver line opening, obviously. No one does here. But it would be unbelievable if we were to open the silver line all the way to Ashburn.
No, it'd be
And
quite
you could-
believable. It's
well-
just-
And then you couldn't actually take it. That is on the radar. Okay, I'm just raising it because, I was talking to Kate earlier this week and we were starting to talk about this and I'm like, wait a minute. We're starting to line up here where this could be a problem, so.
I mean, I don't want to stray out of my lane.
Yeah.
The issues at the platforms that are going to be addressed next year are not as severe as the ones
Okay.
that were addressed this year. So presumably, there could be a scenario where you maintain power so that a train could run through a station that is not operational.
Got it.
So.
Great. I will wait further information. We will all wait further information. I feel a little better.
I don't want to do that. So, but that brings up another question about the phase 2. So on our neck of woods where parking at Wheelie is bursting at the seams and discouraging ridership. So a lot of the talk is about plus or minus July 2020. So are we talking about fine tuning the date or is it potentially significant deviations?
I wouldn't even want to speculate at this point because we need to have we're gonna get this update on September 12th as to where we are with the issues. There are significant issues that have been discovered to date.
Okay.
I don't know how successful they've been in making progress towards fixing those. But since one of the weird things, and this is going back way beyond my pay grade, but you've got MWA who's doing the project, who then turns it over to Metro to take a look at it. So we're getting this natural delay with Metro not being able to tell you how close it is, because we won't know until WMATA says we think we're done, and then Metro stress tests it to see that it actually is.
Switch up a little bit, but along the same lines, Mr. Dorsey, the transition from from MWA to WMATA, thank you, and acceptance of the work product, the finished line. I see there's a strong emphasis on timing. And so I'm starting to ask myself, who has skin in the game in this process where potential defects are either remediated or not? And so there's a lot of payers represented in this room. So just worst case would be the problems that exist weren't completely remediated and were passed over from WMATA. I don't know really what skin in the game WMATA has. Maybe that's not for you to answer, but what are the processes in place that will provide absolute assurances that these problems aren't passed off to the people that are putting the bill, and as with the platforms, for example, just a loose comparison, so that the costs and the delays don't become the problem of people that fund WMATA.
Thank you. I think it's a terrific point, and one of the things the board has stressed, and the general manager, I think, fully agrees, the acceptance of the project is not going to be a pro forma exercise. It's going to be rigorous, because WMATA is not going to accept something that's going to require in 10 years we do shutdowns of phase 2 to correct rail defects, for example. So there's a clear hierarchy of what's important. You know, the rail system has got to be perfect. You know, cosmetic issues at the rail yard can maybe be dealt with an escrow account, for example. Panels that are not structural, if there's a solution that can be implemented and money to ensure that it's re-implemented if it should prematurely fail, those can solve those sorts of things. So I think your question is top of mind. Like, make sure that the systems that affect ongoing service, those absolutely have to be delivered according to specification, no deviation. If there's a legitimate way to deal with another defect through through money in some way, shape, or form, I think WMATA will consider it, but that's top of mind.
And maybe
it's an excellent point.
Maybe I can add. So there is overlap because Loudoun and Fairfax are project construction funding partners and, of course, Metro funders. So all of the Capital Rail constructors discussions, Loudoun and Fairfax staff are at the table for every one of those as full participants in the project. And so just to echo what Christian said, I think everybody involved has the same attitude about this, which is that Capital Rail constructors has to complete things to the satisfaction of Metro before they accept it. And then some of those items can be dealt with potentially as a punch list, but anything that's structural, I think we are all in agreement, even on the construction side, has to be dealt with. And that's true for the rail yard as well, because there are some issues at the rail yard.
And Mr. Chair, I would say that that the review already is very vigorous. So it's not as though WMATA is sitting back waiting, for the project to be finished and for it to be handed over. They're at the table right now. And especially where issues are identified, they're part of resolving those issues and satisfying themselves that, that things are being resolved in a way that they're okay with. So we'll sit around this table with different hats on our
we'll be hearing it. Geo-targeted social media ads, website banner ads, and on-screen cinema advertising will reinforce drive time messages throughout the day. NVTC Jersey via websites. Branded Nova Rides is scheduled to launch on Monday, September 16th, a week after WADA's planned resumption of rail service. You can see online ads in the kit, and Matt Friedman, NVTC's Manager of Outreach and Communications, will show us one of those video ads at it'll be on local theaters as well as online.
Good evening, folks. It's short. We'll show it to you a couple of times, but here it is. Another try here, so you can see it in the beginning again.
There we
We
go.
also have, within the printed material, there's a number of the web banners and all those other things. There's a couple different ones.
Hopefully you'll all be seeing the Nova Rides moniker out there. Within NVTC, a lot of this work was done by Jay Watkins, Matt Freeman, and Melissa Walker, so thank you to them. And also with the jurisdictional communications and marketing staffs from Alexandria, VRE, Fairfax County, and OmniRide. So that's the team members. Awesome. Any questions, comments?
Just if that can be shared with those who are using social media, but not just for the local officials, but for the state officials. I know there's a bunch with active presence would probably share that to their own different lists.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
So again, we launched on the 16th. And so WTOP and WAMU are the radio. Just keep that in mind, local theaters. And then social media is a relatively inexpensive way, so it's probably all over social media. Great.
All right. Yes, and we already have a list of our partners that we normally work with, plus we're making a list of officials and other organizations, state agencies, folks. We literally have a social media kit that we will send to them. They'll have suggested things to tweet and Facebook. We're making it very easy for folks to share our message. This also happens, it rolls out during the Tri-Transit Week. And then Tri-Transit Week wraps up, and then we have car-free days in the DC region. So we're going to share with the partners who are organizing those two programs as well.
Can you remind me what a car-free day is?
It's just encouraging people to ride the bus and the train. But that's.
I would just like to say as a comment, I'd just like to thank you for appealing to the demographic that doesn't just use an electronic device, but I saw someone actually reading something physical.
You'd be amazed at all the discussions we had about what went into that. So we tried to think about those things. So.
You'll be tracking metrics and so forth.
Yeah, so we do have a very robust plan. So both AMU and DC or WTOP, we also have digital programs with them, and we're going to be able to track this essentially minute by minute, and we're going to have extensive reporting, and we will come back to you all with reporting as the program goes on and when it's over after the 12 weeks.
All right. Sounds great. Good work. Looking forward to it.
Can I seriously ask one more question?
Sure.
When I asked about free transit, I must be wrong because no one else seemed to recall it that way. But what happens on a code red air quality day in Northern Virginia? Do people get the ability to ride their local commuter bus for free? Is that what happens or no? Or is it just reduced cost? It was the Washington Metropolitan Air Quality Commission with Todd. Is anyone here in the room on it?
I am, I chair it, and I don't run a local bus system, so I don't know the answer.
When I was on it, I thought that it was, that they would actually do it free on code red days, and that they ran, no? Well, I'll just.
You're not making it up. I do remember
it's
that
right,
at some
Okay,
point.
well, I just want to say, obviously, it's not going to happen next week, but for future metro legs that are fixed, there's probably nothing that will get people back on the train than saying the train is free. And I hope we attract people really quick, and people who found alternative means, but just a consideration that might want to be studied for future legs.
But Adam, was it rail? I thought it was on.
No, it wasn't rail. It was
Yeah,
just
I
the
think it's making
local.
two separate.
I thought it was just the local, I don't even know if it was Metro bus. I think it was the local feeder bus systems that feed into Metro.
I think one thing to look at, to your point, would just be what the ridership numbers do look like once we reopen here and how quickly people come back.
According to Google,
Well, can't be wrong.
first thing to pop up was no more free bus rides during code red days. Montgomery County was the last jurisdiction in the area to offer free bus rides. So apparently we did before, and this was 2010.
Well, that's a result of me getting off the Washington Metropolitan Air Quality Board of COG and Mr. Snyder chairing it.
Well,
You know what, Senator, since you raised it, we'll pick up the issue and have it thoroughly discussed.
But I will say, I don't think that too many people get up in the morning and think about their day to work and say, oh, it's a red day, so that means transit will be free. Like they're not gonna even know that until they.
Or change the pattern based on it.
Yeah. But anyway, all right, let's move on to commuter choice, shall we? 395.95. We've been through this. You all know what it is. Alan is here to provide a summary of the, first I-66 and then 395.95.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. A quick update on the work that we've been doing on the 66 inside the Beltway Commuter Choice Program. We met with the Program Advisory Committee a couple times this year. They provided us with some really good feedback about the scoring process and how things could be improved. So a lot of the work we've done this summer is taking a look at that feedback and adjusting the proposed scoring changes that we're going to be bringing to you later on this fall in more detail. So basically the changes we're looking at is how we allocate the 100 points you can potentially get for any project. We're adjusting it to look at the cost effectiveness as capital projects come in, making sure that capital projects are being scored based on the long-term life of the asset instead of just on the short term like it has been in the past. And so really going to improve the competitiveness of capital items. We're working a lot to encourage folks to coordinate between jurisdictions. Also putting more emphasis on the technical evaluation. This has had 3 cycles so far with 66 and 1 cycle with 395, which we're in. We've had a lot of lessons learned, and this is a continued adaptation to maintain the integrity of the program going forward. Also, one of the things we'll be talking about going forward is moving to a 2-year program. It's a lot of work to run multiple calls for projects with 1 year on both corridors. So the work we're transitioning through now with how we set up 395 and how 66 will happen this fall is sort of staggered. 1 year we'll have a call for 66, 395, like that kind of evens out the work that goes into that. On the top of that, we briefed the Program Advisory Committee on some of the changes that we recommended and staff as well. We had several webinars with jurisdictional staff and eligible applicants. It was well received. We'll be providing you all with details about what exactly those changes look like compared to what it was and what it will be going forward in October. And then we'll be asking for your permission to adopt those changes going forward and open our next call for project in November. Also, since you approved the program and CTB did back in June, we've been moving forward with the implementation of those 13 projects. So far, we've executed 4 standard project agreements. We have multiple in the pipeline now to get those executed and get them up and running. And we're continuing to meet with all of your staffs on a regular basis to make sure we're finding out how the projects are doing, the status of things, can we help them move things along, and basically collecting data that goes into our annual report that we provide to the CTB every year. That's my report, Mr. Chair. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yes.
One question, and it's separate from the scoring on commuter choice, but I recall last year I was having a conversation about HOV enforcement on 66 inside the Beltway. I know the state had done a couple enforcement programs to try and catch scofflaw offenders. Do we have a sense of what HOV enforcement is inside the Beltway? Are we better or worse than we were last year in terms of violators?
I can get that information. That's a combination between VDOT and the state police. And so let me follow up with them and see what information they have.
Maybe speaking of HOV though, I think some of you probably saw the announcement from the Commonwealth that the federal government has ended HOV lane access for, in our case, vehicles with clean special fuel plates, such as mine. And so as of September 30th, there will be no, other than certain plugins, hybrids will no longer be allowed in any HOV lanes. Now, 66 had already happened, but it's a big deal on the Dulles Toll Road. And I'm really worried about it just because most of the users of the HOV lane are those clean special fuel plates. And so if they are now in mainline, there's gonna be some real congestion there. So we'll have to see. But I suspect from an enforcement point of view on HOV only, that'll probably make it a little easier. But good question on 66, because I did for the very first time see somebody get pulled over actually just last week by state police. The very first time all my commuting back and forth that I've ever seen somebody 66 inside the Beltway actually pulled over. So there you go. There's something.
And the conversion to hot planes, the inevitable conversion of outside the Beltway was going to render hybrids, clean special plates. You know, they weren't going to be able to use those anyway, but this obviously expedites that. The announcement expedites that.
You mentioned that staff is considering moving to a 2-year program, which makes a tremendous amount of sense given the lift. Are you envisioning at this time that it would be alternating years, or we do the full program every 2 years?
The way we're actually working through the logistics of that right now, we have an internal work session coming up the next week or so. Then we're also going to be meeting with jurisdictional staff to get their feedback and questions on that, what exactly that looks like. I think the way we envision it now is it's going to be 2 years, but it'll be 2 individual years of funding. So almost like 2 one-year programs simultaneously to flow things out. There are a couple cash flow implications we have to consider of when the revenue comes in and then how it's being spent. So there's a lot of questions. So we've talked a little bit internally, and the 5-minute conversation quickly turned into an hour. Like, wow, there's a lot of administrative stuff we have to think through. So we're trying to be very diligent about that. And we will have more details, like I said, to share with your staff. Talk to them. We'll have more details about what exactly that looks like in October.
All right. Anything else on this? So we have a motion on 395.95.
A little bit of context.
Yeah.
Sure. I'll be brief. So similar to what we did with 66, the process for 395, which you have a copy here of. This has a listing of all the different projects that are open for public comment through tomorrow. Basically, the process step that's next is taking this to the Commonwealth Transportation Board to brief them on September 17th. The action item is authorizing Kate to do that. Basically, as part of the process moving forward, the projects were presented to the commission in July, so you've seen this before. Just a reminder, this is not new, so the project list is here and available for you to take a look at. It's important to note that the Commonwealth Transportation Board will not be making an action in 2 weeks. This is simply a briefing on them of all of these projects, of where things stand, an update on the process. We're working very closely with DRPT and their staff to prepare that presentation. Also, the Joint Commission Working Group, again, composed of members from both NVTC and PRTC, is meeting next week to dive a little bit deeper into this program and into moving towards a potential recommendation at the October meeting for a program to move forward from both approval by both commissions and then to be forwarded to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. That's all I have for 395, Mr. Chair.
No, I do have one though. So on this map here, Loudoun County is in green. It says NVTC eligible jurisdictions. But are we eligible for 395.95?
You're technically eligible, but the
You can
projects
prove
have
benefit
to
to the toll
be.
payer.
It's all the jurisdictions of NVTC and PRTC are eligible to apply. The projects, however, have to benefit the toll payers of the corridor.
Of 395 and 95?
And that is the same thing.
I mean,
with
we can
some-
get creative. Good luck.
And there may be some other jurisdictions as well that may have some, a little more challenge. But that's just the way the MOA is.
Okay, interesting. I didn't realize we were even technically eligible, so.
One of the privileges of being the chair, you don't get excluded.
Oh.
If we're ready for a motion.
Yes, please.
I would move that the commission authorize the executive director to present to the Commonwealth Transportation Board projects considered for funding under the fiscal year 2020 I-395.95 commuter choice inaugural program.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded by Ms. Garvey. Opening or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Mr. Chair, please note my abstention on this.
Okay, Mr. Skiles abstains. Any other abstentions? Okay, motion passes. Thank you very much. Okay, there are no VRE action items this month, but Doug Allen is here to give his CEO report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This coming month, we will be working with the city of Manassas to have a full-scale emergency training with one of our trains out in Manassas. We do this regularly with our member jurisdictions so that first responders are familiar with how to work around our equipment. Performance for this last several weeks has been much better than previously. Our on-time performance was just a little under 90%, largely because the heat has receded somewhat. For those of you who have not explained it, it's when the temperature gets to a certain high, when it gets really hot, or if the temperature goes up very fast, the railroad puts in feed orders, we have to slow our trains down. Obviously, that causes delays. We've been plagued with that throughout the summer, but fortunately the weather's turned around and we were right at 90%. Last week we actually had 100% on-time performance day. Ridership has been strong this summer, a little over 20,000, which is a little bit higher than usual. We attribute that to the metro shutdown. We'll see when when the metro stations open up, what happens with our ridership. We are also monitoring Hurricane Dorian to make sure that none of our trains are affected by that, or if they are going to be, that we inform everyone and follow the proper procedures. And then I wanted to report major milestone that the Lion Bridge draft environmental impact statement has been published and made available for public review until the end of October. This is a major step in the development of this project. It's a game-changing project, and the work of District Department of Transportation, who led the effort, the state, NVTC, CSX, and ourselves, VRE, working together to get this draft environmental impact statement out there is a real milestone. Once this is concluded, then finally EIS will be prepared. It'll take about 8 months or so, after which a record of decision gets issued, and that allows the project to move forward. So it's a major accomplishment for the region to get this project to this stage. So we're looking forward to getting that final EIS going. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions or comments on VRE? Okay, seeing none, which is probably good, because we've had some things, not this month, so that's good. Okay, Director Mitchell is here from DRPT.
Thank you. Just an update again, as has been mentioned before at our September CTB meeting, we will be reviewing a presentation from Kate and DRPT about the 95 and 395 list of projects, but no action will be taken until October. We will also be reviewing recommendations regarding the CTB's role in potentially withholding funds if related to the conditions outlined in the WMATA legislation. So we provided an update. We'll be making recommendations to the CTB this month. We did provide an update to the CTB back in July that outlined how WMATA had responded to all of those minimal qualifications. So that will be coming for an action item to CTB this month. As Doug mentioned, the draft EIS for Long Bridge was just released today. It's a huge milestone. There will be a public meeting on October 22nd. And we are hoping for a record of decision by the middle of next year, which is a big deal. Also, today, I'm very happy to announce we had Federal Railroad Administration signed our record of decision for DC to RVA, which has been the end of a 5-year process. So we're very happy to have that done. That also gives us the ability to move forward with the 4th track project in Arlington that is funded and leads into the Long Bridge, and also a 3rd track project between Franconia and Thornton that would also be part of those improvements. So very pleased to have that done today too. Thank you. And also, as was reported in our written report, we are working on an update to the I-66 outside the Beltway Transit Plan. This was, as you may recall, this plan was done back in 2014 before I-66 inside the Beltway was a reality. And so we've been working on updating that, doing some new travel demand forecast and looking at the recommendations that were in that. And we expect to release some results in November. Also VDOT is conducting with DRPT and the Office of Intermodal Planning and Investment, the I-95 study as well. There were some preliminary meetings, public meetings held over the summer. There will be final recommendations released in November with public meetings being held through the end of November, and then those will be delivered to the General Assembly in January. And that is the extent of my report.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Yes.
So big day with the EIS coming out for Long Bridge. I'm still reading the details, but the one thing I took away from it, in addition to general enthusiasm, is that it did seem a little weak on the bike and ped, which I know is something we've talked about before as a commission, wanting to see that. Do you have any insights into, I'd be interested in how you'd characterize what you saw. It seemed like it was sort of gestured at the possibility that it could be done in the future, but it wasn't included in that 1.8 billion estimate. Any more you can share? And if we are interested, either as individual jurisdictions or potentially as the commission, in weighing in on that recommendation.
I'll let Doug jump in as well. If probably the best way that I could characterize it is that the bike ped bridge is being considered as a mitigation alternative or a mitigation measure that would be related to some of the impacts on federal parkland in that vicinity. It was not a core part of the purpose and need of the project, which was really because the project's purpose and need is rail and to carry more rail traffic. But it is something that the district, along with us and VRE and FRA, are discussing with the Park Service right now about how that would be included as a potential mitigation in measure in the scope of the project.
So it does still have an opportunity to be included in the core scope, not as an add-on.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I really appreciate that, and we may want to remain interested in that and potentially involved as a commission. Definitely appreciate the point that it is an environmental mitigant, and I think it is. But it also could be a major transportation connectivity for those of us who are in the inner jurisdictions or the jurisdictions where folks are taking metro and that's part of their last mile, et cetera. So
Also a relief valve in the event of an emergency, which we've experienced.
That's an
So,
excellent,
which I think has been
point.
underappreciated.
Yes, that's an excellent point, actually. And so to that end, I know COG has done a lot of the emergency, or led on a lot of the regional emergency planning, and they may be a good partner on this too. I suppose I'll end then to say I would appreciate anyway being kept updated as that element of the conversation, about that element as those conversations move forward, and we may as a commission want to get involved as well to more vocally lend our support if that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep you all updated. We'll always be looking for funding partners for that project as well.
That would really make our opinions go a long ways if we were funding partners.
Yeah. But no, I agree. It does have a lot of regional mobility benefits, but if it sounds wishy-washy, it really wasn't intended to, but it's really because it's being treated as a mitigation measure.
Well, and if I could just expand on it, the purpose and need of the project is passenger rail, commuter rail goes through the FTA, but also intercity rail, which is long distance. But we recognize that this would be a mitigation measure. Jennifer's exactly right. It's going to be used as a mitigation to impacts on the parkland, and clearly the emphasis on transport on bike and ped is huge, and it will serve a commuting market from Crystal City area. So that's the reason it's not part of the prime project, but we knew it was going to be part of the mitigation and being advanced through that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Follow-up question on the funding package, is that still being worked through, or so?
It is. I believe we'll be coming back to you all in October with some more information about that. I can tell you that we're working very actively right now on identifying funding sources and funding partners. That will include our federal stakeholders, which is probably one of the biggest outstanding pieces right now. Also looking at potential sources of regional funds, statewide funds. We are looking at leveraging pretty much every statewide rail dollar that we have, along with other federal dollars that are multimodal, not specific just to rail, but we are really looking at all the funding sources we have available at our end to bring to this. And because it is such a significant investment, not just for this region, but also for the state. You know, we do recognize that VRE is the primary beneficiary of this as in terms of new capacity going forward. And so that'll be a part of the discussion, obviously, with funding too. So, but we will be bringing back some more information at the next meeting on that.
Right, and I'm particularly interested in preserving the I-66 corridor funds for use on the I-66 corridor. So I wanted to put that marker down, number one. Number two, this serves freight rails as well, right? So what share of the funding is the private sector going to be called to put in?
We'll have information, some more information. It's still subject to negotiations.
And to switch gears to one other thing, I'm interested if the operators, Metro, VRE, VRPT, have looked at the effect of extreme weather events and whether they're increasing and what cost they're exerting on either your capital or operating budgets. I'd be interested in looking at that.
In terms of resiliency efforts or resiliency planning, or, you know, there's been a lot of discussion at the CTB level about looking into this some more. I think it's probably been a little bit more of a focus of VDOTs, at least in Hampton Roads and some other particularly vulnerable areas. But I know there may be some efforts coming up to do some more, incorporate that in a more a rigorous way with some of the state's projects.
Because it's not just along the coast. What we saw on July 8th in certain of our jurisdictions, major flooding can occur far away from the coast or even far away from rivers. And what impact is that kind of thing? A, is it documented? I want to go in facts. Is it documented? And B, what are the costs to deal with that changing?
Mr. Snyder, if I could add to that, the extreme weather, we've been impacted pretty severely this summer. I mentioned the heat orders, the extreme heat, the fact that that's required us to slow our trains down, and obviously we don't build our schedule on slower speeds, we build them on normal speeds. So the on-time performances have been impacted, but also some of the storms that have hit, knocked trees down, flooding has occurred. So some of the extreme weather has had pretty substantial impact on our operations this last summer.
Thank you. Okay. Any other DRPT questions? Yes.
DRPT, actually, yeah, this would be DRPT. I guess I thought it might be a good time to bring up what I keep minimized here on my pad, and that is enactment clause 4 of the WMATA Safety Compact. Perhaps a good action item would be or informal request would be to ask Kate to circulate that to the commission members. And as much as we're preparing to send different reports to the General Assembly in the next session, I think I've made it clear that I believe that this provision has not been met.
Can you refresh us?
Sure,
The
yeah.
reporting one?
It was included.
It is.
Mr. Chair,
No,
we
we'll-
actually
we'll
have
let-
made reference we actually have included a link to it in the materials that was set out for the meeting, so.
Tonight?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I'll read just the first sentence or so you'll have some idea what I'm talking about, if that pleases the chairman. Thank you. That the Secretary of Transportation, in coordination with Northern Virginia Transportation Commission shall engage counterparts in Maryland, Washington, D.C., and appropriate officials in the federal government for the purposes of revising the Washington Metropolitan Transit Authority Compact of 1966. So, I think that mattered enough to the legislature to put this in here. And I think that there's probably a presumption when the funding agreement was passed that all provisions of the compact, the safety compact would be adhered to. So I think that makes this important. It's certainly a charge that names the commission specifically directly, and I have not yet seen a report that fulfills this, in my opinion. So I'll be bringing that up, Lord willing, if I'm back in the legislature in 2020. So I just thought it'd be a good time to bring it up and draw it to the attention of other commission members, in as much as there may be differing opinions as to whether or not that's being fulfilled or not. And rather mention that beforehand than after the fact. Thank you.
All right. We're moving on to the executive director report. Yeah, I can do that first, sure. So for just kind of some housekeeping, it is that time of the year where we are going to be conducting as a commission our performance review of Kate. So everybody on the commission will be receiving an email from my office that'll have a link to a Google survey. And I ask that you fill it out. We're hoping to have these completed or enough of them completed so that we can have a discussion at the October commission meeting. I personally likely have a conflict with a League of Women Voters Forum, as it is that time of year. But for those that are here, to have that discussion and then potentially kind of wrap that process up in November. So we have a little bit of time to talk about any results and actions we might want to take. So please be on the lookout for that. We'll send out a couple reminders likely, but we appreciate everybody's cooperation. I also wanted to mention that the executive committee has also engaged with Arlington County on what they call a 360 review of NVTC as a whole, not being done because of any concern or any particular reason other than we have a lot of new staff. We have some changes in our mission. And so we thought it would be a good time to just sort of take a step back, get everybody's perspective on what's happening. So I am working with Arlington's HR staff, and they are putting together a process and a question that will likely take place throughout the fall and then be available for our discussion towards the end of the year. So I just wanted to make everybody aware of that. I'm happy to answer any questions about it either now or privately or what have you. So thank you very much.
All right. So first, actually, I did talk about new staff. I actually want to introduce our latest staff member, Tenley O'Hara, right in the back. She's actually, when you come to our offices, she's going to be welcoming folks at the front desk. So we're delighted that she's here. She actually is, if I'm going to get William and Mary graduate, that's correct. And she's been working on communications and education things here in Arlington for the past 2 years. So we're just delighted to have her here. She's also, of course, because everybody works on a little bit of everything, helping with a lot of grant tracking as well as our communications work. So we're just delighted to have Tenley with us. So the other thing, I just heads up as we look forward into the fall, we do have a number of things on the commission schedule happening through fall. Several things that have come up today. In October, it's going to be the 395-95 commuter choice program selection. That's done concurrently with PRTC. Same thing that next month will also then be that WMATA report that you were briefed on earlier today. In November, the meeting is 1 week later due to some schedule conflicts, I should say. And at that point, we're going to start talking about the legislative agenda as well as authorizing that next call for projects for I-66. And then also, as we look forward into December, we have just sent out save the dates for our annual legislative briefing that we do joint with PRTC. Just as a reminder, last year we had over 100 people in attendance. We're already getting a lot of people interested just from the save the date. And so right now we've invited Secretary Valentine to come and talk about her priorities. We've reached out to, of course, VRE and Doug, as well as Paul Wiedefeld, to be sort of sharing the perspective and priorities as we move to the next General Assembly session. So that is on December 9th. At 8:30 over in Springfield, at the same location it was last year at the Embassy Suites. And so we'll provide obviously more information as that lineup gets confirmed. Immediately looking out to the next couple meetings that are happening, we do have a joint commission working group next Wednesday. The following Wednesday, Thursday. See, it is next Thursday. Thank you. The following Wednesday, we actually have 2 committee meetings, our WMATA committee meeting, immediately followed by the Legislative and Policy Committee meeting. And those are going to be starting at 8:30. And likely the Legislative and Policy Committee will ramp up and do that at about 9:30 in the morning. And another thing I just wanted to pass along, is something I was involved in last year. Some of you may see invitations to this, but the George Mason University Shar School puts on, it will be a second annual event for newly elected officials. I think there's a couple folks I met last year, which is basically a briefing and get to know certain topics and issues that are going on in the region. So I've been asked again to come and talk on the transportation things along with Monica Backman. And so that'll be coming together on November 14th, I'm getting it right, November 18th. So it's sort of a transportation 101 to newly elected officials in Northern Virginia. And that is what I have. We do have our financial items included as well, and that's all I have.
Okay. Questions for Kate? No questions for Kate. Okay, well, you have our financial reports. If anybody has any questions, Scott is always available to talk about it. Nobody has any questions because everybody wants to go home, myself included. So with that, thank you for coming tonight, and we are adjourned.
13 minutes early.
I could feel it, I could fit that in.